Hello, everyone. I'm Bob Myers, delighted to be back with you. Today, I am talking to Alex McNeil, who is a very active member, but not a member of the board. He deals with legal and procedural issues, if I understand that correctly, on behalf of the organization. And he's been involved with both this group and the predecessor group for many years. So, Alex, thank you for joining us.
Sure, glad to be here.
Why don't you tell us how you got involved or got interested in the Shakespeare authorship question?
Well, in a minute or so, I had seen the PBS documentary back around 1990, which piqued my interest, although I didn't do anything immediately on that. And then at the Newton Library in 1992, when they opened a new
Newton, Massachusetts
Library. Okay. They opened a new main branch in 1992, and I like libraries anyway. So I went down there and I was wandering through the stacks, and it just occurred to me, I said, let me see if I can find that book they were talking about on the PBS documentary. I didn't remember the name of the author or the title of the book. But I started looking at the Shakespeare biographies, and eventually the mysterious William Shakespeare stood out, and I could tell from the jacket that that was the book. So I took it home and was immediately entranced by it. It convinced me right off the bat. And then I thought, well, I'd try to see if there were any Oxfordian organizations around, because the book didn't mention any. Mm-hmm. So I called the drama critic of the Boston Globe, who I believe had written a blurb for it. And I asked him, I said, do you know of any? And he called me back and he said, yeah, there's a group that's based in Cambridge, Mass. And he gave me the name of Charles Boyle, who was then heading up a local branch of Oxfordians. And that's how I really got started. And then very shortly after that, I joined the Shakespeare Oxford Society around 1993.
And so that was a predecessor group to the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship. Yeah. Were you on the board or particularly active in that group?
No, I wasn't very active in the Shakespeare Oxford Society, but I did become active when the Shakespeare Fellowship broke off and got established in 2001. I was one of the I guess you could say, founding members of that. And I was on the board, and I was also president a couple of times for the Shakespeare Fellowship.
And do you have a particular interest in any aspect of authorship, that is to say, the education of the would-be author or experience or travel? Are there some things that intrigue you more than others?
No, I would say that's a good question. It's really all of the above. And I think I've said to many people, and as I'm sure you know too, the kind of people who are in our organization, we get a lot of people who come from fact-based backgrounds. We have lawyers, we have scientists, we have physicians, a lot of folks like that, journalists like yourself. And that was really the hook for me. It's as a lawyer, it's really an evidentiary question to me, first and foremost. And I think the evidence for Will Shakespeare of Stratford is pathetically thin, and the circumstantial case for Edward de Vere, 17th Earl of Oxford, is, as a circumstantial matter, overwhelming.
Well, you can convict someone of murder without a body, so
of course you can. Yes,
this is not unusual.
Matter of fact, they just indicted a guy today. It's gotten some national attention. The guy, his name is Walsh, whose wife disappeared around New Year's Day, and he's been evasive.
That's in your neck of the woods, right?
Yeah, it's about 40 miles from here. They just indicted him for murder today.
Excellent. Well, I mean, not for him, but
not for him.
I deal with the issue. So you mentioned evidence, which leads me to suspect, if I didn't know better, that you are an attorney and you have worked in the legal field. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, my career actually was spent really behind the scenes. It was what you call judicial administration. I worked for 37 years for the Massachusetts Appeals Court, which is a state appellate court, the second highest court in the Massachusetts state judiciary. And for the last 36 of those years, I was the court administrator. So I was sort of, I guess you might call it the equivalent of what the COO. I made sure the place was running on a day-to-day basis and that we had enough cases to hear and who was going to sit on what days and, just a lot of miscellaneous stuff, a lot of different responsibilities.
And are you still doing that, or have you?
No, I retired in 2010. So I've been retired for 12 years. I've gone back to the appeals court on a few short-term special assignments, but not on any regular basis.
So within the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship, the current group, when you are involved, how are you involved? What do you do?
Well, I had been for the last several years of the, let's say 2009 to 2013, maybe, I was the editor of Shakespeare Matters, which was the Shakespeare Fellowship quarterly newsletter. Roger Strittmatter and I kind of shared the responsibilities, but I ended up really being substantially the editor, and he did most of the layout and design. And then when we were doing the merger in 2013, I volunteered, really. I said, if you want me to take over the newsletter, which at that time was being edited by Dr. Michael Egan, I said I'd be happy to do it. I'm not forcing my way in, but if you want me to do it, I'll do it. And I also said, since I was retired, I said, I don't need any money for it. I'll do it for free. So
you're the kind of volunteer they like.
That was really the entree.
Having to keep my material handy here.
Right.
All great musicians do that. They pull it out and find them a piano, and then they start playing. So the Shakespeare Oxford Newsletter, which you edit, comes out how many times a year? How many pages? And
well, it's quarterly, 4 times a year, really, in February, May, August, and November. A varying number of pages. I usually shoot for 32. A few times I've gone down to 28, and a few other times, especially recently, I've had to go to 36 pages.
Ooh, lots going on.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. I'm getting a lot of material. One thing I have really never had a serious problem with was having enough material for the newsletter. I get enough stuff from people of different lengths and different topics that that hasn't generally been a problem.
I mentioned in another meeting that when I moved from being a reporter to being an editor, I suddenly realized that I was the SOB I used to complain against.
Of course.
So within your sphere of editing, are there issues that stand out that are particularly contentious, or at least that somebody thinks are particularly contentious?
You mean within the Oxfordian movement?
Yeah.
Oh, well, sure. I think the number one third rail, and it's been a third rail since it was first promulgated 90 some years ago, is the Prince Tudor or dynastic succession theory. Namely, did Oxford and Elizabeth have an intimate sexual relationship that resulted in the birth of a baby boy who was raised as the third Earl of Southampton? That is the most contentious issue that I'm really aware of within the Oxfordian movement. And as I say, it has not cooled down, I don't think, since it was first promulgated. It's interesting to me that with so many people, there's very few people who are middle of the roaders on it. Almost everybody is either passionately opposed to it, to the extent that this is an embarrassment to the Oxfordian movement, or they are staunchly in favor of it because they say this answers all the questions about the why and the how and the who and the when.
I suppose it could be regarded as the kind of question that with the information we have today will be impossible to solve. Or am I mistaken on that?
Well, I don't know whether mitochondrial DNA could come into the picture or not. I don't know enough about that to to be able to hazard a guess.
Well, even if you had Henry Risley's, the Earl of Southampton's mitochondrial DNA, you'd need the Queen's mitochondrial DNA. Would
I
you
would
not?
think you'd need Queen Elizabeth's. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
But could you get that from Henry VIII?
oh, that's interesting.
Well, we have a tomb. I mean, they're never going to exhume
Yeah, right.
her tomb, but she's buried. Yeah, right. I mean, theoretically, her body, the remains of her body exist. Yeah. I don't think the British government is going to say, "Oh, yeah, go ahead."
Doesn't sound to me as if they would. Let me ask you about the editing process for the newsletter. Let's say hypothetically, I want to write something. Do I send you a query letter? Do I write it up and send it to you? Do you run it whole cloth? What's the process?
There's no actual protocol. Some people do submit a proposal or even a one sentence thing. Would you be interested in an article about such and such? Some people submit the finished product and, leave it at that. Sometimes I do work very closely, over a series of drafts with people on something. So it's all of the above. I do want to say, as opposed to the Oxfordian, which is our peer-reviewed annual journal that Gary Goldstein edits, I'm not interested in lengthy, deeply scholarly articles because we already have a better place for them. I'm interested, generally speaking, in shorter material. It can be well annotated and it can be, on a high intellectual level, but it doesn't have to be as quite as scholarly as what the Oxfordian would carry. And I'm happy to have opinion pieces too.
Have you ever had someone who said, I'm a Stratfordian and I want to give you an article that no guts, huh?
I wouldn't turn it down.
Well, I mean, better be careful. There's a lot of people out there, a lot of time on their hands and a lot of opinions. So do you see?
However, in fairness, let's say, generally speaking, they have forums where they can be heard. Oxfordians do not have the number or the breadth of forums that Stratfordians do.
Do you see an evolution of the newsletter from what we have today? Hope you can see that. To what it might be in a year or 2 years from now? Have you thought about that at all?
No, I really haven't. I haven't thought about that.
I don't want to put you on the spot,
but if you look backwards, you can certainly see an evolution.
Yeah.
You go to some of the old things that used to be mimeographed and
right.
And I think 24 pages was a common length back in the day with almost no illustrations. Now at least we've got the ability to put a full color PDF up on the website.
And they look good. I mean, they really do.
Good. Yeah. I should also give a plug to my wife, Jill McNeil, who does the layout.
Certainly.
She does a good job. I couldn't do the layout. I can't handle pages for Mac.
I noticed you've got an ad in, this is the fall 2022 edition, got an ad for Hank Whittemore's book, The Living Record, which I think is terrific. And he deals with the issue of the sonnets and succession and the issue of who Henry Risley was. It's a full color ad. What I really want to ask is, do you have policies on advertising? Would you accept an ad from Chevron Mobile or, Tesla? I mean, a commercial entity.
I've never received an inquiry about one. No, we don't have a policy about what nature of ads we would accept. I can't remember ever turning down one, but we don't get too many.
Well, maybe if Elon Musk wanted to establish himself with Oxfordians, this would be a unique opportunity. I mean,
Well, he would just buy the SOF.
that's okay by me. I mean, as long as he didn't try and control it. And that's the problem. Because of your legal background, when there are issues or contracts or bylaws amendments, do you get involved in that?
I do if I'm asked by the board of trustees or somebody on the board. And also, I should say, I'm one of a few lawyers. I'm not the only
Right.
legal point of contact. And it's good to have more than one lawyer to offer an opinion or some constructive help on questions like this. You know, Brian Wildenthal has been very helpful as well.
Yes. I had a really great question that went right out of my mind. So let me try and figure out what else. You've made presentations. I know what it was. You've made presentations at the conferences. You made one in where were we? In Ashland. And that's being
that was I actually gave that at the spring seminar, the online seminar.
Okay, all right.
Last April.
So many things one forgets. But that's now being, what would you say, converted into a full presentation?
Yeah. It'll have better production values. And Cheryl Egan Donovan and her son, Liam Donovan, are working on it now. They filmed it at my house about a month ago.
Oh, wow.
We're trying to keep it to more or less the same length.
Right. And do you see yourself doing more of that kind of thing in the future?
Quite possibly, yeah.
That was a presentation, as I recall, that sort of was a broad overview of why Oxford was the guy and
why Shakespeare wasn't.
And why Shakespeare wasn't.
Yeah, I wanted to do a 30 minutes was what the slot was. So I wanted to do an introduction within 30 minutes that would really cover those two broad bases: the case against Shakespeare of Stratford to be the author, and the case for Oxford to be the author. And, without going into great detail in any particular facet. And that was an interesting process, actually, because I'd done that presentation, my goodness, I'd say first 2007 or 8 for a presentation that was at the Boston Public Library. And that was a 60 or slightly longer presentation. And then I cut it down for another venue. And then I was giving it at a retirement community near here in Concord, Massachusetts, maybe 6 years ago. And the activities director there said, keep it to 45 minutes. You will lose your audience here after 45 minutes. So I agonized to cut it to 45. And then I agonized again to cut it down to 30 for this one. But it was a very, very interesting and rewarding process to have to decide in your own mind what is absolutely essential to present and what can be discarded.
A lot of people don't understand the anguish that journalists go through in writing, especially cutting something from.
Well, yeah, and it's not only journalists. It's like a film director. His first cut is 4 hours, and he's got it, or they've got to cut it to 2 hours. It's an
or 3.5.
Yeah, it's an agonizing process. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Any more such presentations on your desk for the future?
I'm thinking about one for the next conference, the one that's coming up in New Orleans in November. It's going to be a little bit offbeat. What I wanted to do was compare, in very rough terms, I want to compare the Shakespeare authorship question and its evolution over the last 100 years to the Copernican theory and its first century or so. And the fact that the Copernican theory, almost nobody bought it when it was first promulgated in the 1540s.
And he was then after it came out, he was confined to his house on
No, you're thinking of Galileo.
Galileo. Yes,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah.
You're right. Sorry.
Well, Copernicus was a little bit more politic, and he was also devoutly, well, I don't want to go into it now, but he was
Okay.
devoutly religious. And so he was not trying to upset the theological apple cart at all. He just came up and actually promulgated this idea to the papal authorities first and say, look, this is just a theory, but it's got fewer bells and whistles than the current system, with all these epicycles and things like that. And originally, the papal authorities were very receptive to it. It was only after a few years that the tide began to turn, and he got all kinds of, hate mail is not quite accurate, but he was discredited essentially.
That really sounds like a good presentation. You think you'll have it ready for New Orleans?
Yeah, and it's only going to be 30. I want to do it in 30 minutes.
You don't want anybody to come along and say, do it in 20. We're kind of tight. All right. Anything I have missed in my intensive examination of your background and commitment?
A couple of things. Talking about editors, maybe, I don't know, because you were a journalist, and I know because I am one, and I did a lot of writing when I worked for the appeals court as well. And we had an in-house editorial department at the appeals court that edited outgoing decisions, which was unusual, but a very, very good crew of people. It's a strange business, and no one has ever read a book and said, what a well-edited book that is. They always say, what a great
You're breaking
writer.
my heart. You're just breaking my heart.
What a great writer she is. What a great writer he is, What a great writer they are. But, it's like being kind of an offensive lineman in a way. You make the hole so that the back can carry the ball, but you don't get a whole lot of credit for it. But that's okay. And also, there may be a genetic component because that's what my dad did.
That's interesting.
He was a professional journalist, and for at least the last 28, 29 years of his journalistic career, he was an editor as well.
Where did he work?
Well, he originally worked for the Syracuse Herald as a reporter, and then moved to New York City and wrote for a jewelry trade publication.
Huh.
And then he got an offer during World War II to move to Washington to write for what was then a popular news magazine called Pathfinder. Mm-hmm. And so he moved to Washington in 1944. I was born in Washington.
Oh, really?
And then that magazine went out of business in 1957. He almost by coincidence ended up back at the Jewelry magazine, which had then moved to Philadelphia, but he became the editor at that time in 1957. And he remained as editor for 16 years or so until he retired. So I can remember him talking to me about editorial things, and also, the editorial conventions and the Stet and the Marks and all those proofreading things, which were all second nature to him.
When I after my first book was accepted and the proofs were sent back to me for me to review, they sent back a list of those diacritical remarks or marks, and I had never seen most of them before at all. It was like reading a foreign language, and I had to figure out what they were and then mark them in. And of course, the editor had your best interest at heart. It's just hard accepting that when you go through it, but all worked out well. Good. Well, thank you. This has been terrific. I appreciate your time, and let's do it again. And I look forward to the next issue of the Shakespeare Oxford Newsletter.
Okay, and people can reach me at newsletter at ShakespeareOxfordFellowship.org.
That's newsletter at ShakespeareOxfordFellowship.org. Right. All right, Alex, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Bob.
Take care. Bye-bye.